He was a Navy SEAL, trained to fight wars, not demons in the snow. When his helicopter crashed in the frozen mountains, everyone thought the mission was over, until his dog started barking at something buried beneath the ice. What they found wasn't an enemy. It was a child, and a secret that would test the limits of his faith. Some battles aren't fought for victory, they're fought for redemption. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. Snow fell like ash over the jagged spine of the Montana mountains, turning the world into a silent cathedral of white. The wind howled between the pine trees, sharp as a blade against exposed skin. Beneath the iron-gray sky, a U.S. Navy SEAL helicopter cut through the storm, its rotors fighting the biting gusts. Inside, Lieutenant Jack Turner sat near the open hatch, his gloved hands resting on the grip of his rifle. Jack was 35, tall and broad-shouldered, his face chiseled and scarred from years of sand, smoke, and loss. A faint line ran from the corner of his right eye down to his jaw, a memory left by shrapnel in Fallujah. His eyes, cold blue like frozen steel, scanned the blizzard beyond the window as if searching for ghosts he still owed something to. He was not a man of many words, and since the death of his brother in a failed rescue mission 2 years ago, he had spoken even less. Grief had taught him silence. War had made him comfortable in it. At his feet lay Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a thick sable coat and eyes that mirrored his handler's, steady, intelligent, and scarred by experience. Ranger had served alongside Jack for 3 years through desert heat and mountain frost, and carried a faint limp in his right hind leg from a gunshot wound sustained during a hostage rescue in Syria. He was the kind of dog that didn't bark unless it mattered. His ears twitched at every shift in the storm, his muscles tense but ready. For Jack, Ranger wasn't just a service dog. He was the last heartbeat of trust Jack still believed in. Across from them, Sergeant Miles Beckett checked his gear with restless precision. Miles was the team's demolitions expert, a man in his early 40s with a barrel chest and hands like granite. His humor was dry, his loyalty unquestionable. A faded tattoo of a coiled snake wrapped around his forearm, a relic from his biker days before the Navy had straightened him out. He looked at Jack with a smirk. "You ever think we'll stop jumping into places God clearly abandoned?" Jack's lips curled faintly. "Not our job to judge God's sense of real estate." Their mission was simple on paper. Extract a group of American missionaries trapped in a remote mountain settlement after local insurgents, calling themselves the Sons of Redemption, took control of the area. But nothing about Montana's northern ranges was simple this winter. Temperatures had dropped below -20, and communications were breaking faster than command could patch them. The pilot, Captain Drew Hastings, a wiry man in his 50s with crow's feet etched deep from decades of flight, leaned back and shouted over the radio static, "We're hitting heavy turbulence, visibility near zero." His voice cracked with the mix of control and fear that only veterans of too many close calls carried. Before anyone could respond, the cockpit erupted in alarm, missile warning lights blinking red. "Flare! Flare!" Beckett yelled, but it was too late. A surface-to-air missile sliced through the storm like a viper, striking the tail rotor. The helicopter spun violently, metal screaming against the sky. Jack grabbed for the rail, Ranger sliding across the floor, claws scraping. The world became a blur of white and noise. Beckett's face disappeared into smoke. Jack felt weightlessness, then pain. He woke in silence. The wreckage burned faintly behind him, orange against the snow. Smoke curled into the night, carried by a wind that smelled of oil and death. Jack's body ached. His helmet was cracked. The first thing he saw was Ranger nudging his shoulder, whining softly, muzzle streaked with soot. "Easy, boy," Jack murmured, his voice hoarse. He glanced around. The others were gone. Beckett's seat belt hung torn from the wreck. The pilot's remains were half buried in snow. He was alone. Jack pulled the radio from his vest, his fingers trembling from cold and shock. "This is Turner. Bird 2 is down. Coordinates." Static answered. Then, faintly, a voice. "Jack, this is Command. You're the only one transmitting. Satellite feed shows hostiles closing in. Do not engage. Find shelter and await extraction." He looked to the horizon. Through the haze of snowfall, faint figures moved. 3, maybe 4, armed men descending from the ridge. Jack clenched his jaw. "They'll be here before extraction does." He checked his rifle, half a magazine left. "We make our stand here, Ranger." The dog barked once, low and short, as if understanding. The wind intensified, carrying the whistle of incoming fire. Bullets shattered the snow near his boots. Jack dropped to one knee, returning fire with methodical precision. One target fell, then another. The third scrambled behind a boulder, shouting in a foreign tongue. The echoes of gunfire died into the storm's growl. As silence returned, Jack's mind replayed the moment of the crash. The sound of Beckett's laughter, the look in Hastings' eyes before impact. He forced the memory down, focusing on the immediate. Survival first. He scavenged what he could from the wreck, ammunition, a med kit, a flare gun, and strapped it all to his vest. Ranger sniffed at Beckett's dog tag half buried in the snow. Jack picked it up, brushed off the frost, and clenched it in his palm. "You didn't deserve this, old man." He tucked it into his pocket, a promise and a burden. He radioed again. "Command, I'm heading east toward the valley. We'll attempt recon of crash site perimeter. Rangers with me?" The voice crackled back, almost inaudible. "Copy. Hostile activity. 30 or more moving east. Extraction ETA unknown. Stay alive, Lieutenant." Jack slung his rifle and started down the slope, Ranger leading through the snow that came up to their knees. Every gust of wind carried a whisper, as if the mountains themselves were mourning. Jack's breath turned to steam, his vision blurred from exhaustion. Somewhere deep inside, grief whispered, "Why you again? Why always you?" He shook his head. Ranger barked softly, grounding him in the moment. The dog looked back, eyes steady as if saying, "Don't stop now." By the time they reached the tree line, night had fallen fully. The temperature dropped further. Frost crusted over Jack's beard and the edges of his rifle. He found a narrow cave carved into the rock and decided to rest. Inside, he lit a small fire from a flare and dry pine bark. Ranger curled beside him, his body heat radiating through Jack's arm. The sound of the wind outside was relentless. Jack stared into the flame, his thoughts drifting to his brother Ethan Turner, who had died in a similar blizzard 2 years earlier, trying to rescue civilians from a mountain ambush in Norway. Jack had promised himself never to let another mission end like that. Yet here he was, history echoing through snow and silence. "If you're watching," he whispered to the fire, "I won't let them die in vain." Outside, far across the ridge, the faint red glow of enemy flares flickered in the sky. like the eyes of something ancient waiting in the dark. The storm thickened again, hiding the dead, the living, and the things that refuse to die. By the end of this chapter, Jack Turner and his dog Ranger survive a helicopter crash in a Montana blizzard. As the sole survivors, they fend off approaching enemies and find temporary shelter in a cave, preparing for the next phase of survival and rescue amid an unforgiving winter battlefield. The blizzard had not eased by dawn. The wind shrieked through the trees like an ancient voice warning those who dared to stay. Jack Turner woke to the low growl of Ranger beside him. The dog's ears were erect. His nose pointed toward the cave's mouth. Something was moving outside. Jack reached for his rifle, careful not to make a sound. He crept toward the entrance, snow crunching faintly under his boots. Through the gray haze, he saw them, two figures trudging through the snow, their silhouettes blurred by the storm. Not Taliban, not uniformed soldiers either. Civilians, maybe? He hesitated. After last night, trust was as rare as warmth. When the shapes drew closer, Jack aimed his rifle and shouted, "Identify yourselves!" The figures froze. A man's voice called back, trembling, "We're Americans! Don't shoot!" Jack lowered the barrel slightly but didn't relax. The first was a man in his late 40s, rugged but worn, with a salt and pepper beard and a heavy parka, patched at the elbows. His name, as Jack later learned, was Reverend Samuel Cole, a missionary who had been stationed in the Montana backcountry for the past decade. His skin was weathered like old leather, his eyes lined with the weight of too many winters and too many lost souls. Once a military chaplain, he had left the service after his wife died in the church bombing overseas. The loss had turned his faith inward and his heart toward helping the forgotten. The second figure was a woman in her 30s, clutching a medical bag close to her chest. She had long auburn hair matted by snow, pale skin flushed red from the cold, and sharp green eyes that flicked between Jack and the tree line. Dr. Emily Rhodes, a trauma physician volunteering with Cole's mission, had once been a field medic in Iraq. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen enough blood to stop flinching at the sight of it. A scar traced a thin line from her temple to her cheek, a reminder of an explosion that had nearly taken her life years ago. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from cold and exhaustion. "Please," she said, "we saw the crash from the ridge. You're one of the soldiers, aren't you?" Jack lowered his rifle fully, scanning the tree line behind them. "You shouldn't be out here. The area's crawling with hostiles." Emily glanced at the Reverend, who nodded. "We had to find you. They've taken the rest of our people. 20 missionaries, maybe more. The Sons of Redemption have them near the river." Jack's expression hardened. "I was sent to get you out. Now it's just me." They entered the cave to escape the wind. Emily knelt beside Ranger, inspecting the old scar on his hind leg. "He's seen as much war as any man," she murmured. Ranger's tail thumped lightly, accepting her presence. Reverend Cole leaned near the fire Jack had rekindled, rubbing his hands. "We prayed for rescue. Looks like the Lord sent a seal instead." "Oh, of angels." Jack didn't smile. "Angels don't bleed, Reverend." Over a brief meal of ration bars, Jack learned the situation was worse than command had known. The Sons of Redemption weren't foreign insurgents. They were American extremists, ex-military deserters and survivalists who believed the collapse of the nation was divine judgment. Their leader, Victor Kane, was a former Green Beret who had vanished 5 years earlier, after being dishonorably discharged for killing civilians during an operation gone wrong. Cole had crossed paths with him before. Victor had once come to his church, drunk and desperate, claiming God had spoken to him through the screams of dying men. Cole had refused him help. Now, it seemed, Victor had found his own gospel of violence. Jack felt his stomach tighten. If Kane's involved, this isn't just a kidnapping, it's an execution waiting to happen. Emily's gaze met his. Then we stop it. Her voice held no hesitation, only weary resolve. Jack admired that. He saw in her the same hollow courage that had once kept him alive. As the storm eased, the trio set out toward the valley. The snow stretched endlessly before them, broken only by the dark lines of pine and the silver shimmer of ice. Ranger trotted ahead, nose down, tail rigid. He had caught a scent. Jack followed closely, scanning through his thermal goggles. Faint heat signatures flickered to the east. 3, maybe 4 men. They were guarding something. The group crouched behind a fallen log. Through the scope, Jack saw an abandoned cabin half buried in snow, smoke leaking from a cracked chimney. Shadows moved inside. He whispered, "We take it slow. Reverend, stay behind me. Doctor, keep low." Emily's eyes burned with tension. "I know how to move, Lieutenant." Ranger crept forward first, silent as breath, until a sudden snap of a branch broke the quiet. A guard stepped out, rifle in hand. His face was young, maybe 20, but his eyes were dead. Jack fired once, clean and cold. The boy fell without a sound. Another emerged from the doorway, shouting. Chaos erupted. Jack rolled into cover, returning fire as Ranger lunged, teeth flashing. Emily dragged the Reverend back behind the log. The firefight was brief, but brutal. When the last shot faded, only snow and smoke remained. Inside the cabin, they found what was left of a supply post, maps, ammunition, and a battered radio transmitter. Emily examined a dark stain near the wall. Blood. Recent. Ranger growled softly and nosed a torn scarf lying on the floor. Reverend Cole's face paled. "That belongs to one of ours. To Lily." His voice cracked, grief strangling the word. "She's only 7." Jack felt a chill deeper than the cold air. He looked at Emily. "They have a child?" She nodded grimly. "And they won't keep her alive for long." Jack clenched his jaw, the memory of his brother's failed rescue burning like fire in his chest. He turned toward the door. "Then we move before dark. We find her." The radio crackled to life, static. Then a voice, male, low, mocking. "Lieutenant Turner, I know you're out there. You survived the crash. Impressive. Tell me, how does it feel to play God's soldier in my land?" It was Victor Kane. His voice carried the calm madness of a man who had replaced guilt with righteousness. Jack froze, listening. "I have the girl. Come for her if you dare." Then silence. Ranger barked once, sharp and urgent. Ears pointed to the east. The sound of engines echoed faintly through the snow, growing closer. Jack loaded his rifle, his heartbeat steady but cold. "He knows we're here?" Emily met his gaze, fear flickering behind her strength. "What do we do?" Jack's voice was low, certain. "We fight our way through, but we don't die here." Outside, headlights pierced the blizzard, trucks approaching fast. Ranger snarled, the firelight catching the edge of his fangs. Jack turned to Cole and Emily. "Get ready to move. When I say run, you run." The storm swallowed his words as the engines roared nearer. Somewhere in the darkness, Victor Kane was waiting. By the end of this chapter, Jack Turner teams up with Reverend Samuel Cole and Dr. Emily Rhodes, survivors of the mission group, and learns that the extremist leader, Victor Kane, an ex-Green Beret, has kidnapped a 7-year-old girl named Lily. After a brief gunfight in a snowy cabin, Jack receives a taunting radio message from Kane, revealing he knows Jack's location. Trucks close in, setting the stage for a deadly confrontation. The storm had thinned by the time the trucks came into view, their headlights cutting jagged paths through the snow. Jack Turner crouched behind a fallen pine, heart beating in rhythm with the thrum of approaching engines. Ranger pressed close beside him, every muscle taut, eyes glinting amber under the moonlight. Reverend Cole and Dr. Emily Rhodes hid farther back, behind a wall of frozen brush. Snowflakes clung to Emily's eyelashes as she watched Jack signal her to stay down. 2 trucks, he whispered into the radio. 5 men each. Light armor, no heavy guns. We can take them if we move fast. The voice on the other end, command, was faint through static. Negative, Lieutenant. Reinforcements are en route. ETA unknown. Maintain position. Jack glanced at the white horizon. Reinforcements wouldn't make it through the storm. Copy, he lied. He motioned to Ranger, then circled wide, moving through knee-deep snow. The first truck skidded to a halt near the cabin, men jumping off with rifles slung across their shoulders. They wore mismatched winter gear, some still bearing military insignia crudely torn away. One man, clearly the leader of the small unit, stepped forward. His name was Mason Holt, a heavy-set ex-Marine in his late 30s, with a thick beard frozen in the cold. His right eye was glass, a souvenir from a roadside bomb in Kandahar. Mason had been under Victor Kane's command once, and when the government abandoned his unit, Kane's words had become scripture to him. His loyalty now burned with fanaticism. "Search everything," Mason barked, his voice gravelly. "The SEAL's here somewhere. The Shepherd, too." Jack's jaw tightened at the mention of Ranger. He waited until the men spread out, then fired. One fell instantly, another screamed, clutching his shoulder. Chaos erupted as bullets tore through the trees. Ranger lunged out of the shadows, a blur of fur and fury tackling a man into the snow. The fight was short but merciless. Jack moved like a ghost between trunks, firing in controlled bursts, conserving ammo. Mason ducked behind the truck, shouting orders, his breath steaming. "Flank him! Use the cabin as cover!" Emily gritted her teeth. "He's outnumbered," she hissed. Reverend Cole clutched his cross pendant. "He's not fighting alone." Then, as if answering that faith, an explosion split the night. The fuel tank of the first truck ignited from Jack's bullet. Flames leapt skyward, reflecting off the snow like molten gold. The shock wave threw Mason to the ground. When he looked up, half his men were gone. The others fled into the forest, their morale broken. Jack approached carefully, rifle aimed. Mason, blood trickling from his temple, tried to reach for his sidearm. "You can kill me," he rasped, "but it won't change what's coming." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Then tell me where she is, the girl." Mason spat blood onto the snow. "The Shepherd doesn't get to save the lamb." He grinned, a cracked, bitter expression. Jack's finger tightened, but before he could shoot, Mason laughed and pulled a pin from the grenade on his vest. "See you in hell!" Jack dove back, dragging Ranger with him. The blast tore the truck apart, showering the clearing in fire and debris. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left of Mason but a crater of flame. Emily ran up, panting. "Jack, are you hit?" He shook his head, brushing soot off his sleeve. "No, but now Kane knows we're close." The Reverend's eyes filled with weary sorrow. "That man, he used to sing hymns with my son." Jack looked at him, unsure what to say. "War changes the music, Reverend." They gathered what they could from the wreck: maps, rations, and a half-burned journal that Mason had carried in his jacket. Inside were coordinates, scribbled in a trembling hand. Emily traced them with a gloved finger. "This is near the Blackwater River." Jack nodded. "That's where Kane said he'd be." He folded the page and stuffed it into his vest. "We move at first light." They traveled through the forest as dawn rose pale and merciless. The snow glittered under a bruised sky, the world silent but for the crunch of boots and Ranger's low, huffing breath. Hours passed before they spotted smoke again, this time darker, thicker, curling from beyond a ridge. Jack raised his binoculars. Below lay a small farmhouse, half collapsed and burning. The roof sagged inward, and the yard was littered with bodies in heavy coats. One figure moved among them, dragging another by the arm. Jack's stomach twisted as he realized it was Lily's father, Pastor William Hart, the head of the mission. The man was in his mid-40s, tall and gaunt from captivity, his face hollowed by hunger and grief. His once black hair was streaked with gray, his hands trembling as he tried to lift his wife's lifeless body from the snow. "No," Cole whispered. "That's William." He took a step forward, but Jack stopped him. "Wait." A gunshot cracked across the valley. William jerked, then fell beside his wife. The figure who fired stepped into the open, Victor Kane himself. Through the scope, Jack saw him clearly for the first time. Kane was in his mid-40s, tall and lean, with a face that might have been handsome once, but was now carved by madness. His dark beard was neatly kept, his uniform custom, half military, half preacher's robe. His eyes gleamed with a cold zeal that frightened even the wind. He knelt beside the fallen pastor, murmured something, then looked toward the ridge as if he could sense Jack watching. "You found him," Emily whispered. Jack lowered the scope slowly. "Yeah," he said, voice low, "and he's not hiding anymore." They waited until nightfall before approaching the farmhouse. The fires had died to embers. Inside, the walls were scorched, the smell of kerosene heavy in the air. Ranger moved ahead, sniffing, ears twitching. Jack motioned for silence. In one of the rooms they found a crude map pinned to the wall, drawn in charcoal. Circles marked Camp Alpha, the pit, and one marked simply the child. Emily stared at it, eyes wide. "He's moving her," she whispered. "They're relocating before we can reach them." Jack clenched his fist. "Then we'll have to move faster." Reverend Cole touched the blackened wood of the wall. "This was a house of faith," he murmured. "Now it's a tomb." Jack turned to him. "Then let's make sure they stop building more." As they stepped outside, a faint light flickered on the opposite ridge. 3 flashes, spaced evenly apart. A signal. Ranger barked once, tense. Jack raised his scope again and saw movement, figures, at least a dozen, fanning out through the trees. Kane's men had circled around, waiting for night to fall. Emily drew in a sharp breath. "We're surrounded." Jack's voice stayed calm, but his pulse hammered. "Not yet. We still have one way out." He pointed toward the frozen river beyond the trees, its surface gleaming faintly under moonlight. "That ice can carry us downstream to their camp, if it holds." Cole looked doubtful. "And if it doesn't?" Jack met his eyes. "Then we freeze before we burn." The howl of wolves echoed across the valley, long and mournful. The snow began to fall again, thick, heavy. endless. By the end of this chapter, Jack, Emily, Reverend Cole, and Ranger survived the ambush, defeating Mason Holt's squad, but realizing Victor Kane has anticipated their every move. They witness Kane execute Pastor William and discover that Lily is being relocated to another hidden camp. Surrounded and outnumbered, they prepare to escape across the frozen river toward their enemy's stronghold. The wind screamed through the valley like a living thing as Jack Turner and his small band moved toward the river. The moon hung low, swollen and red, behind a curtain of clouds. Every sound, every broken branch, every breath felt louder in the silence that followed Mason Holt's explosion. Ranger padded ahead, his fur dusted with frost, head low, scanning the shadows. Behind Jack, Dr. Emily Rhodes trudged forward, face pale under her hood, eyes fierce despite the exhaustion. Reverend Cole's cross swayed against his chest as he murmured quiet prayers, his breath forming halos of steam. Their boots crunched over the snow until they reached the riverbank, a wide expanse of ice that gleamed like a mirror beneath the moonlight. Jack knelt, scraping a glove across the surface. "It's thick," he said. "Might hold." He tossed a heavy rock. It bounced, slid, and stayed intact. Emily exhaled in relief. "We're really doing this," she said half to herself. "Crossing on frozen death." Jack glanced up. "You got a better idea, Doc?" Her lips twitched, almost a smile. "I'm still thinking." They began to cross. The ice groaned under their weight, singing a long, low note that echoed through the valley. Ranger led the way, paws splayed carefully, tail straight for balance. Halfway across, the sound of engines rumbled again behind them. Lights flared from the tree line, Kane's men spreading out, guns glinting in the dark. "Move!" Jack shouted. Bullets sparked against the ice, sending chips flying. Emily stumbled, nearly falling, but Ranger turned back, teeth clamped on her sleeve, pulling her upright. Cole gasped, crossing himself as they sprinted for the opposite bank. Then came the crack. A rifle round hit near Jack's boot, splintering the ice in a jagged spiderweb. The next moment, the surface gave way beneath him. He plunged into black water. The shock stole his breath, 1,000 knives stabbing into his skin. "Jack!" Emily screamed. Ranger barked wildly, claws scraping at the edge of the hole. Jack surfaced once, gasping, then vanished again. Cole dropped to his knees, reaching out helplessly. Underwater, the world was silent and green. Jack kicked hard, fighting the current that dragged him beneath the ice. His chest burned. Through the blur he saw faint light, air pockets trapped beneath frozen sheets. He slammed his fist upward again and again until the ice cracked enough for his hand to break through. Ranger's teeth found his sleeve, tugging with desperate strength. Jack hauled himself out, shivering, coughing up river water. "I'm fine," he wheezed, though he was anything but. Emily tore off her outer jacket and threw it around him, her hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. "You'll freeze," she warned. "Already am," he muttered. They made it to the far bank, collapsing among snow-dusted rocks. From across the river, Kane's men shouted, but didn't fire. The current and fractured ice had made pursuit impossible. Jack lay still, breathing raggedly. His lips had turned pale blue, his skin rigid with frost. Emily knelt beside him, opening her medkit. "If he goes hypothermic, we lose him." She stripped off his soaked gear with brisk efficiency, pressing heat packs against his chest. Ranger lay curled at his side, whining softly, as if guarding his soul from leaving. Cole built a small fire behind a wall of stone. Its light flickered on his tired face, eyes hollow but determined. "You risked your life for ours," he murmured. Jack managed a weak smirk. "Don't flatter me, Reverend. I'm too stubborn to die." Emily looked up sharply. "Don't joke. You need rest." He gave a short nod, then stared into the flames. "Rest is a luxury we can't afford." As dawn crept over the horizon, the storm finally began to break. Wisps of sunlight cut through the mist, turning the frozen forest into a landscape of glass. They continued west, following the coordinates from Mason's journal. Each mile was harder than the last. Jack's limbs ached, his clothes stiff from frost, but he pressed on. Ranger stayed close, every step purposeful. The bond between man and dog felt almost supernatural now, a wordless connection forged through danger and pain. By afternoon they reached a ravine where the river split into two narrow streams. On the far side stood an old mining outpost, half buried under ice. A rusted sign, barely visible, read Blackwater Station. "That's it," Jack said. "Kane's been using old mining tunnels for transport." Emily frowned. "And Lily?" "If the map's right," he replied, "she's somewhere inside." They descended into the ravine cautiously. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. Inside the outpost, the walls were lined with frozen lanterns and abandoned crates. The silence was thick enough to feel. Ranger sniffed the ground, ears twitching. Then he stopped, hackles raised, growling deep. "What is it, boy?" Jack whispered. Before he could answer, a voice echoed from the shadows. "Welcome, Lieutenant." A man stepped into the faint light of the fire. Caleb Ward, one of Kane's lieutenants. Caleb was tall and wiry, maybe mid-30s, with hair so blond it was nearly white. His skin was pale, his lips cracked from cold. One eye was missing, replaced with a jagged scar that split his face from temple to cheek. Once, long ago, he had served under Jack's command in Iraq. Back then, Caleb had been a loyal, fearless marksman, until a roadside bomb had blinded him in one eye and killed his brother. The military called it an accident. Caleb called it betrayal. Kane had found him soon after, offered him purpose. "I knew you'd come," Caleb said. "Kane told me you'd never stop chasing ghosts." Jack's grip tightened on his rifle. "You shouldn't have followed him down this path." Caleb smiled thinly. "We all follow something, sir. God, guilt, or orders." The title, Sir, dripped with bitterness. Ranger growled, muscles coiled. "Where's the girl?" Jack demanded. Caleb tilted his head. "Close enough to hear you scream." Then he drew his pistol and fired. The cavern erupted into chaos. Bullets sparked off stone. Emily ducked behind a crate, shouting, "Jack, left flank!" Ranger darted forward, leaping onto Caleb, knocking him off balance. Jack rushed in, the two men grappling in the snow. Caleb's strength was surprising, driven by fury and faith. He swung the butt of his gun, catching Jack across the jaw. Pain flashed white. Jack retaliated with his knife, slashing Caleb's shoulder. The fight was brutal, silent except for the crunch of boots and Ranger's snarl. Finally, Jack pinned Caleb against the wall, blade to his throat. "Where is she?" Caleb's good eye flickered with something like pity. "Too late," he whispered. "They're taking her to the pit." Jack hesitated for a heartbeat, confusion flickering. "What pit?" Caleb smiled faintly, blood bubbling at his lips. "You'll see." Then his hand moved fast, grabbing a detonator hidden in his coat. Jack dove back, just as an explosion ripped through the chamber. When the smoke cleared, Caleb was gone, either buried under debris or vanished into the tunnels. The blast had collapsed half the passage, sealing the exit. Emily coughed, helping Cole to his feet. Jack steadied himself, wiping blood from his cheek. The air was thick with dust and smoke. "We can't go back," Emily said. "Then we go forward," Jack replied. He picked up a flashlight from the floor and shone it into the darkness ahead. Far down the tunnel, faint footprints, small ones, led deeper underground. Ranger sniffed the air, tail low, and barked once. Jack's voice was low but certain. "She's alive." Then he looked toward the darkness. And so is Kane. By the end of this chapter, Jack, Emily, and Reverend Cole narrowly survive crossing the frozen river under enemy fire. Jack nearly drowns, but is saved by Ranger and Emily. After reaching an abandoned mining station, they encounter Caleb Ward, an ex-soldier turned lieutenant of Victor Kane, once part of Jack's own unit. A brutal fight ends with an explosion that collapses the tunnels. Following faint, child-sized footprints, they realize Lily is alive, but being taken deeper into the mines toward a place known only as the Pit. The tunnels beneath Blackwater Station seemed endless, carved into the mountain like veins leading to the heart of something ancient and cruel. The air grew colder the deeper they went, thick with dust and the faint metallic tang of blood. Jack Turner led the way, flashlight trembling in his hand. Ranger padded silently beside him, every step measured. Behind them came Dr. Emily Rhodes and Reverend Samuel Cole, both weary but unbroken. Their breaths fogged the air, small ghosts dissolving into the dark. Jack's mind was sharp, despite the exhaustion. Every echo made his trigger finger twitch. The memory of Caleb Ward's smirk before the explosion burned in his mind. The Pit. That's where they were headed. And somewhere ahead, Lily. He had promised himself that no more innocents would die on his watch. Not again. The tunnel forked, one path leading deeper underground, the other rising slightly toward faint light. Ranger stopped, nose pressed to the ground, tail rigid. Jack knelt beside him and found a small piece of torn fabric, pink, with a faint floral pattern. "Lilies," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. Jack nodded. "She's close." They followed the scent. The passage opened into a cavern the size of a cathedral, its ceiling lost in darkness. Torches flickered along the walls, illuminating a scene that turned Jack's blood cold. Dozens of men knelt in rows, chanting in low, rhythmic voices. In the center stood Victor Kane, his arms raised over a crude stone altar. His robe, once military green, now dyed with soot and blood, hung heavy around his gaunt frame. His eyes burned with a feverish light, and on the altar, bound but alive, was Lily. Jack signaled Emily and Cole to stay hidden. He raised his rifle, taking aim at Kane's chest. But before he could fire, Kane's voice thundered through the chamber. "Brothers," he roared, "the soldier comes, as I said he would, the false savior, the wolf dressed as shepherd." The chanting ceased. Dozens of heads turned toward Jack. Kane smiled, arms outstretched. "Welcome home, Lieutenant Turner." Jack stepped forward into the torchlight. "Let her go, Kane." His voice echoed against the stone. Kane laughed deep and genuine. "Still giving orders, still pretending you serve something greater than yourself." He gestured toward the altar. "Look at her, Jack. This child is the world's last innocence, and it dies tonight so the rest of us can finally be free of guilt." Emily whispered to Cole, "He's insane." The Reverend's face was pale, but his eyes burned with defiance. "No," he said quietly, "he's lost." Kane's men began to advance, rifles raised. Jack opened fire. The cavern exploded into chaos. Ranger lunged forward, snarling, taking down one guard after another with feral precision. Emily ducked behind a pillar, firing her sidearm, while Cole dragged Lily off the altar, shielding her small frame with his own. Bullets sparked off the stone. Torches toppled. Smoke filled the air. Jack reloaded and scanned for Kane. The man was moving toward a side passage, cloak flaring behind him. Jack sprinted after him, Ranger close at his heel. The chase led through a narrow tunnel, lit only by flickering lamps. "You think you can stop what's coming?" Kane's voice echoed ahead, steady even as he ran. "You've been fighting phantoms your whole life, Turner. The war ended, but you never did." Jack rounded the corner, and Kane struck. The two collided, their weapons skittering across the ground. Kane swung a knife, catching Jack across the shoulder. Jack retaliated, slamming him into the wall. "You killed innocent people," Jack growled. Kane's eyes blazed. "No, I saved them from the lie of peace." He shoved Jack back, slashing again. They grappled, the blade flashing between them. Kane was strong, fueled by conviction, but Jack fought with something deeper. Guilt turned into resolve. Ranger appeared, teeth bared, and clamped onto Kane's arm. The fanatic screamed, dropping his knife. Jack seized the moment, tackling him to the ground. They rolled across the dirt, fists connecting with bone. Finally, Jack pinned him, hands closing around his throat. "This ends now." Kane's face twisted into a half-smile, even as his breath choked. "You think killing me saves her? Saves you?" His words gurgled as Jack's grip tightened. "We all kneel to something, Turner, God, war, or the ghosts we made." Jack hesitated, his mind flickering to his brother's face, to all the men he couldn't save. He loosened his grip just enough to speak. "I don't kneel anymore." Then he drew his sidearm and fired once. The echo thundered through the tunnels. Kane fell back, eyes glassy, a faint smile still frozen on his lips. When Jack returned to the cavern, the fight was over. Kane's followers had scattered, their faith collapsing like the ceiling dust raining from above. Emily was tending to Lily, who clung to her arm, face streaked with tears, but alive. Cole stood nearby, bleeding from a shoulder wound, but his eyes shone with weary relief. Ranger trotted toward Jack, tail wagging weakly, muzzle stained with dirt and blood. Jack knelt beside the girl. "You're safe now," he said softly. She looked up at him, eyes wide, trembling. "Are you an angel?" He smiled faintly. "No, kid. Just a man who still believes they might exist." They left the tunnels as dawn broke over the mountains. Snow fell lightly, peaceful for the first time in days. The sunrise turned the world gold. Emily helped Lily wrap a blanket around her shoulders while Cole recited a quiet prayer for the dead. Jack stood a few steps away, staring at the horizon. For the first time in years, he let himself breathe. Ranger pressed against his leg, warm and solid. Jack scratched behind his ear. "We did good, boy," he murmured. The dog barked once as if agreeing. The wind carried the sound across the valley, soft and pure. But as they walked toward the extraction point, something caught Jack's eye. A figure far up the ridge, half hidden in the trees, too distant to see clearly. For a moment he thought it was Caleb Ward. Then the figure turned and disappeared into the mist. Jack frowned, uneasy. "Let's move," he said quietly. The war might be over, but some ghosts refused to stay buried. As the helicopter approached, its blades slicing through the winter sky, Jack looked back one last time at the mountains. Somewhere beneath that ice and stone lay the bodies of the fallen, and the memory of what men become when they lose faith. He tightened his grip on Ranger's collar and stepped aboard, leaving behind the snow, the blood, and the echoes of the pit. By the end of this chapter, Jack kills Victor Kane in a final brutal confrontation deep inside the pit, rescuing Lily and ending the extremist cult's reign. The surviving heroes, Jack, Ranger, Emily, and Reverend Cole, emerge into the dawn, carrying scars, but also hope. As they await extraction, Jack spots a mysterious figure watching from afar, suggesting the story's end may only be another beginning. In the quiet after the storm, Jack Turner realized that miracles don't always arrive with thunder or wings. Sometimes they come in the shape of a loyal dog who refuses to give up, a doctor who still believes in saving lives, or a stranger who prays for light in the dark. God doesn't always stop the storms, but He gives us the strength to walk through them. And maybe that's the true miracle. Not that we survive, but that we still choose love, courage, and faith after everything we've lost. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it, not just to spread it, but to remind others that kindness still exists. Leave a comment, subscribe to our channel, and pray with us for those who are fighting their own silent battles tonight. May God bless every soul watching this, and may He send His angels in whatever form they take to walk beside you through your storms.